Hi, everyone, and welcome to the AIHM Friday Wellness Webinar Series. We're thrilled to have Dr. Dan Handley with us for the second part in a three-part series on genetics. And today, we'll be discussing genetic ancestry testing, misconceptions, and ethical dilemmas. So while people are starting to come in to the Zoom, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Academy. The Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine is a global interprofessional integrative health association working to transform healthcare, mind, body, spirit, community, and planet. And if you are coming in for the first time, you can watch our Friday Wellness webinars for free on Facebook, or you can go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/AIHM Global, and subscribe to our channel and watch any of the recordings anytime. So we have lots and lots of different presentations and speakers, and we encourage you to join our channel so that you can stay up to date on the educational offerings. So I just wanted to take a minute and invite you all, for those of you who are really looking for a deeper educational program, our fellowship in integrative health and medicine is offered twice a year. Our upcoming cohort starts in October. Is a 1,000-hour evidence-based curriculum in integrative health and medicine. And the program is for licensed providers that have a master's degree or higher. So if you are interested in the fellowship, and you can get $1,500 off tuition if you mention the SCU ad from our SCU sponsored webinar today. So it's a true honor to again welcome for the second part of the three-part series, Dr. Dan Handley, who is an MS PhD. Dr. Handley attended Johns Hopkins University, Carnegie Mellon University, and earned his PhD in Human Genetics from the University of Pittsburgh. He is the director of the Clinical and Translational Genome Research Institute, the director of the Master of Science in Human Genetics and Genomics degree program at the Southern California University of Health Sciences, one of the AIHM sponsors, and he serves on the board of directors of Predictive Oncology, Inc. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Handley, and he is going to talk to us today about genetics and genetics testing. Welcome, Dr. Handley.
Great, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to present to the AIHM. Let me share my slides. All right, everyone see the title screen here?
Yeah, that looks great.
Great. So today I'll be talking about genetic ancestry testing, which a lot of people have done, and there are a lot of issues surrounding genetic ancestry testing that I want to bring to your attention, and especially for healthcare practitioners. I believe it's important for you to be aware of these issues. It's such an enormous field. I won't get into a lot of technical detail. We just don't have time for that. It'll give you an overview and hopefully give you some food for thought. Again, about me, this is kind of a repeat of the introduction.
Dan, can you reshare? I'm seeing your slides are cut off on the left side. Is anyone else seeing that just on the team?
Yes.
Yeah. You might have to unshare and reshare. For some reason, we're not seeing the full slide.
Is that better?
Great. That looks great. Thank you.
Okay. well, it's the wonders of electrons, what they do.
That's right. The tooth fairies are sometimes in our
Yeah.
favor and sometimes not.
Yeah. So yes, we've already gone through essentially my background. The next slide. So the learning outcomes. So at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to state a brief history of testing for genetic relatedness, explain the reasons for the rapid rise in genetic ancestry testing, state the purposes of genetic relatedness tests, explain the 4 main ancestry relatedness test strategies, state the limitations of current ancestry testing, analyze the ethical issues associated with ancestry testing, which is very important, state examples of unanticipated outcomes of having an ancestry test performed, which is very, very important, and state the reasons for the importance of informed consent prior to having an ancestry test performed, which a few people seem to do. And at the end of this presentation, I think you'll see why informed consent is really important. So first, I'll start out with a brief explanation of inheritance. So this is an ideogram. It shows actually 24 chromosomes, but 23 chromosomes, which we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. This is one of each pair. So there are 2 homologous chromosomes. So you have 2 chromosomes 1, 2 chromosome 2, etc. And whether you're male or female, if you're female, you have 2 copies of the X chromosome. If you're male, you have an X and a Y. And then the MT are mitochondrial DNA, which are very important. There's maybe hundreds to thousands of mitochondria in a cell, and they each have their own unique or their own genomes. And so what happens during inheritance, and what's really important about this, so here's a simplified drawing of meiosis. So that's gamete production, so sperm and egg, right? And so this is a simplified diagram that shows really 4 chromosomes on the left, their interphase. And what's important to note is that in this meiosis 1, what's called this chiasma, is a crossing over. So sometimes these chromosomes, these homologous chromosomes, will cross over, and then you'll see in what it results in is 2 daughter cells that have mixed and matched parts of chromosomes. So that's really important. So so you actually get a portion of your grandparents' chromosomes mixed and matched, and so that's going to become apparent later why that's important. And so after meiosis 2, what results in the gamete, which has just 1 set of chromosomes, so 23 chromosomes, and then that will combine. Sperm and egg each has 23 chromosomes, they'll combine for 46. So there's a lot of mixing and matching of genetic material. And so this is what you end up with. So this is a karyotype. This is a male, obviously, because it's X, Y, but again, it shows the photographs of the different chromosomes. You see how they're arranged in order of length. So this is a normal karyotype for a male. For female, it would be 2 X's. And so geneticists typically use pedigree charts. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, on this legend, but an example pedigree, first you have a father who's a square, That's the way I remember it. Men are squares. Women are denoted by this round symbol, and then their descendants are denoted through these lines. And this is how you create a pedigree chart. And some of these can be really enormous, and especially for families in certain cultures that that take a lot of genealogy history. They have these enormous pedigree charts. But we'll see why this is important. So this is a pedigree chart that shows how Y chromosomes are inherited. So Y chromosomes are in males, and so they are only passed down to males in the family. And so if we had a larger pedigree chart, you'd see the males in the family inheriting the Y chromosome from the founder, essentially, the person at the top level of the pedigree. There's also mitochondrial inheritance that I mentioned, and that's only found in women. So mitochondria predominantly come from the egg. Mitochondria come down in lineage to both males and females. So you inherit them from your mother, whether you're a man or a woman. You inherit your mitochondria from your mother and grandmother, and great grandmother, etc. So this is of importance as well. So a short history of ancestry testing or relatedness testing. 1930s, they only had blood typing, ABO blood types, and then they added RH factors and then other ones. Then in the 1970s was serology, so human leukocyte antigen testing. So we're not even into genetics at all yet. It's only in the 1980s and 1990s that we started using genetic techniques for looking for relatedness. And so there's RFLP, which is called restriction fragment length polymorphisms. The idea is that there's certain places in our genomes that are repeat DNA, and they differ between people. And you also can get different copy numbers from your mother and your father. And so that uniquely identifies you. And then in the 1990s, PCR, polymerase chain reaction, became more popular. So it allowed for taking very tiny samples of DNA and amplifying it. I think we've all heard about PCR testing in the COVID-19. And so that technology has really progressed. In the 2000s, they started using SNP arrays. So SNPs are single nucleotide polymorphisms. So a lot of words, but it really means just when you look at a genetic code, a single nucleotide variation. So an A instead of a T, or a C instead of a G, etc. And these SNP arrays interrogate the genome for specific loci, specific places within the genome for those single nucleotide variations. And then in the 2010s, essentially, now we have sequencing, genomic sequencing, so you can read the whole genome. That's typically not used for this type of testing, but it can be in certain cases. And so why do we have this this rise in direct-to-consumer genetic testing? Well, one thing is that these SNP arrays are actually pretty low cost. So low cost technology can run a lot of samples on the same array in some of these technologies. So that makes it affordable. So these companies can run your ancestry test, for $100, $200, $300. The first company was Family Tree DNA, started in 2000, providing tests directly to the public. So prior to that, when you wanted to have any sort of genetic test done, you really had to go to a healthcare professional to get a prescription and have a licensed laboratory do the testing. And so this is a turning point in DNA testing, because now it's direct to consumer. So you see advertisements for doing DNA tests for a lot of different reasons. And then we also started to see these databases being created. So one is with the Genographic project, and that was launched in 2005 by the National Geographic Society and IBM. And they wanted to get samples from humans all over the world and try to get a map of human migration patterns by looking at the DNA samples and using mutations to see how humans migrated from around the world. But there's just many, many databases, some of them open source, some of them different governments, the US government and other governments have their the DNA databases that are open source and anyone can browse. Most of these companies keep their databases proprietary, and there's dozens and dozens of direct-to-consumer testing companies, and they usually keep their databases proprietary. And they have many of them have many millions of samples in their databases. So a lot of reasons for identity testing. Anthropology, which is really interesting. That was the National Geographic project. They use it for forensics, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Identification of remains. Certainly paternity testing is big. And what we'll focus on is genealogy, which is considered entertainment. And I will explain to you why it shouldn't be considered entertainment and should be considered more seriously, and should have experts involved. And in fact, if you talk to genealogists who use genetic testing, they use genetic testing, ancestry testing, as a supplement to traditional genealogy techniques. They don't rely on genetic testing solely, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So the four major types of ancestry testing, one is autosomal DNA. So when I showed that diagram before, that's 1 through 22, chromosomes 1 through 22. So it's just all the chromosomes minus the sex-determining chromosomes. You can also test the X chromosome, which is inherited. So a male will have an X from a parent and a Y chromosome, and a female will have 2 X chromosomes. So that gives additional information if you test, you look for sequences on those chromosomes. The Y chromosome is inherited solely through the paternal line. So it's only from grandfather to father to son, etc. And so that's important information as well. And then there's mitochondrial DNA, as I mentioned, is only inherited through the females in the family tree. And so when you do ancestry DNA testing, you can use any one of these, and usually they use a combination of these to get more information. Some limitations are, right from the start of these tests that aren't necessarily well known or disclosed to the consumer. One is there's technical false positives and false negatives. So when you use a SNP chip, it has maybe 500,000 or 1 million different places on it where it looks for single nucleotide variations. Well, in any situation like that, because there's so many tests being done simultaneously, it's inevitable to have false positives and false negatives. And and that's just something that that's inherent in the technology. And so, that could have ramifications with the results later on. Also, depending on the company using different databases and different techniques, you can get conflicting and contradictory results. And a lot of people blog about that. So they say that I sent my sample to company X, another one to company Y, another one to company Z, and they came back and one said I have Polish ancestry and German ancestry. The other one comes back and says, no, it's Scandinavian ancestry. They all come back with different percentages and different ancestry results. And there's a reason for that, several reasons. One is they typically use their own proprietary databases. And so if you're looking for ancestry of someone, or someone's interested in ancestry from African heritage, because they don't have a lot of that data in their database, it's the information derived is going to be biased. It's not going to have that information. So it won't find African ancestry. And so since all these different companies are using different databases, they get different results depending on the composition of their database. Some use open access databases, which could have errors. So when people upload data to an open access database, it could be errors in it. Again, it could have biases in it. Another thing is that people get different results when they upload their data to a raw data analysis website. So there are a number of websites that are available. Some you have to pay for. A lot of them are open access and they're free. And so they say, bring us your raw data that you got from from company X, and then upload your data, and we will reanalyze it. And what they do, they come back with different results from what the company produced. Also, all these different companies use different algorithms, and they use different cutoffs. So what they're looking for is a match in a section of DNA sequence. And as I showed with meiosis, you have crossover of chromosomes, you have an assortment of chromosomes. So there's a lot of mixtures going on. And so what they're looking for is shared DNA sequences. And they could be shared by chance. So two unrelated people could actually have the same DNA, portion of the same DNA sequence. So they have to have a cutoff of some length of DNA that has to match. And they all use different cutoff numbers, which again produces false negatives and false positives. And so another huge issue is that you cannot detect DNA that has not been inherited. So in every generation, you lose a portion of genetic information. And that's one thing that people don't understand. You tend to think that you take a genetic DNA test, that it's going to give you all your ancestry. No, it's going to give you a tiny portion of your ancestry, and it goes back, it's less and less depending on how far back you go in your ancestry, or if you go laterally to cousins and second cousins. So you only share a very tiny portion of DNA, and this is on average, by the way. So it's not exactly 50%. It could vary. It could be 38% that you got from your father and the rest from your mother. So these are just average numbers. So the further you go back, or again laterally in your family tree, the less DNA you're going to share with that person. And so this is another reason, again, you know, as 10 generations back, you have 1,024 unique ancestors, right? And so you're only going to get a small portion of DNA inherited by each of those ancestors, and so a lot of times not no DNA at all from an ancestor. So these tests aren't even close to being completely accurate, and that's another reason why when you go to different companies, you get different results. Another limitation with Y chromosome testing is called daughtering out. And the idea is that if you have family history and then all the descendants end up being daughters from that family tree, well, they're not going to get Y chromosomes. And so the Y chromosome from from an ancestor will never be passed down. So if you do Y chromosome testing, if there are families that have all daughters, they will not pass down that Y chromosome. So that's a limitation for Y chromosome testing. So now we have a lot of ethical issues to be concerned about. So when you take a genetic test of any sort, whether it's for health reasons or for ancestry, that one of the things that's very controversial is, people think of it as entertainment. I want to get my ancestry tested. Well, one thing that's unique about genetic testing in any context, as opposed to other types of laboratory tests, which genetic testing is, even if it's for ancestry purposes, is that typically for any laboratory test, that has to deal with you. If you get a cholesterol test, that really deals with you individually. When you take any sort of genetic test, you're actually testing not only yourself, but also relatives, depending on how, and it depends on how closely they are related to you. So you share about 50% of your DNA with your siblings and with your parents. And so, if you find something in that genetic test, should you have gotten informed consent from your siblings and your parents or from other relatives? Would they want to know? Would they want to know something that's unexpected? And one of the things that comes up frequently, and it depends on the population that you're looking at, but frequently what comes up is the unanticipated result of non-paternity. And it's estimated between 1 to 10% of children are unaware that they're raised by a father not biologically related. And so if you're taking an ancestry test and you're going to share it with your family, the results, and you're not prepared to get that information, that there's no, there's somebody in the family isn't who you thought they were, you're not biologically related, that could be a lot of stress, and that could cause a lot of family disharmony and rifts in the family. It could cause a lot of problems. And so again, people taking a genetic ancestry test, thinking of it as entertainment, and they see an ad on TV or in a magazine or someplace online, and they think, oh, I'll just do it. This will be fun to do. Well, they're not told necessarily to be prepared for results that that conflict with what you think is your family history. Also, some people find out that they were adopted or that a sibling was adopted. So there's no prior consent to that possibility that if I take this test, I may find out that I'm actually not related to my parents. I'm adopted, and no one ever told me. And another one that's really devastating is that it can conceal or reveal incest in the family. And so, that's a big legal issue and a real ethical issue. The other thing is some people take these tests because they know they're adopted and they're trying to find a biological parent or sibling. But do those people given consent to you contacting them saying, I took this DNA test and this says that you're my biological parent? Well, that's an ethical issue. That could be a real problem. Or someone finding a sibling. A lot of times you hear stories about people being happy that they found this person, but you don't hear the stories about people that this is really an adverse effect on their life to find out that, oh, surprise, I have a sibling that I wasn't aware of, or a cousin, right? There's also legal issues of inheritance and ownership, right? So if there's non-paternity, then that raises legal issues. So do you really? It's a family business. Lawyers can come in and maybe argue that, well, you're not biologically related, and so you really aren't entitled to an inheritance or ownership of the family business or something, right? So those are things that people should think about ahead of time. That what are the legal issues if I find out that I'm not related to a person that I think I'm related to? Another thing that's important in a lot of communities is ethnic or tribal affiliation, and so there's an issue there. One is the fact that these DNA tests miss a lot of ethnicity in a person's background, especially the further you go back in time, in generations, you miss a lot of that. So we all know of the issue with Elizabeth Warren, claiming to have indigenous background. Well, she took a DNA test, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she doesn't have that, because if that information's not there, as I described earlier, if you don't inherit that DNA, you're not going to find it. And so it could have a lot of adverse effects with people. And certainly tribal affiliation is important to a lot of people around the world. And if the DNA test conflicts, the results conflict with what you believe to be your affiliation, again, it could be erroneous results, but it would still cause conflict. Or it could be actual results, true results, in which case that's something that needs to be resolved. So, when you're thinking of, well, it's just an ancestry test, this would be kind of fun to do, there are a lot of issues that can come into play. Another one is genetic discrimination. So there's a law that was passed about 10 years ago, the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act, that it's pretty narrow in its scope. And so it deals with employment, and this is a US law. It's not, every country has its own laws or lack of laws about this. So you can't be discriminated for employment and for health insurance, but there are a lot of loopholes. So long-term health insurance, healthcare isn't covered under this. There's also genetic discrimination informally in terms of if you share your results with someone, this is my genetic test, and it says that I have this particular ancestry or I'm related to someone, that could cause discrimination against you. And so you want to be prepared for again, unanticipated results. And then a final one, there's more that you could discuss, but if you take a genetic test and it brings to mind that the fact that your grandmother and your mother and your aunt all had breast cancer, then that raises the issue, do I have a heritable health condition? And so, now I need to dig deeper into this. I need to talk to a health professional or somebody to see to get some genetic testing about health conditions. And so this can be brought up. That some of the markers that are tested in Ancestry DNA tests do deal with health conditions, and there are a lot of conditions that are heritable. And certainly, early onset Alzheimer's is one. There's various cancer predisposition syndromes that are inherited. So there's a lot of concerns there that people aren't aware of. So and another one, and in terms of privacy, something that people should be aware of. So, and this made the news about 3 years ago, but it's a lingering issue. And so there is an open source website called GED Match, where you can upload virtually the data raw data that you got from virtually any company, whether it was health related or an ancestry related company. You upload your raw data and it reanalyzes it, but they keep that data. And so law enforcement had been looking for this. It was a killer, rapist, burglar, looking for this guy for years. And what they did was they had DNA from the crime scene, and they used that. They put that into GED Match to look for potential relatives, and they found some family trees that matched, and then they started narrowing down the list. So using additional information, so age, residences. So they started eliminating people one by one until they narrowed it down to one suspect. So that's how they caught the so-called Golden State Killer. But there are a lot of other incidents that like that, where law enforcement has found criminals through using these websites. And now different states have different laws about privacy and how they can use it. GED Match specifically says that if you put your information in and you're automatically opted out unless you want to opt in for law enforcement to use your information to help find criminals. And that's an ethical issue. It's great. I think most people would agree it's great that they finally found this reprehensible criminal and convicted him. But you can't anticipate how this information is going to be used. And you have to look at the fine print on these DNA testing websites of how they'll use that information, whether it will be shared. A lot of them say that they will resist inquiries by law enforcement, which that's pretty vague language when it comes down to it. If they get a subpoena to divulge genetic information on a person, I don't see how a company could possibly fight that. And so you have to be aware of that you don't know where your genetic information is going to go. Even though you did it, you started out, this is entertainment, I want to find out about my genetic ancestry. You have no idea. Certainly the people that that submitted their DNA profiles that ended up catching this killer had no idea that that's how their DNA information was going to be used. In this case, I don't think people can, many people can argue that it was a bad thing to catch this guy, but it raises other issues about, well, what else can they do with these DNA profiles? And GD Match only has 1.45 million DNA profiles, but a lot of companies have 14, 19 million DNA profiles. So this is one reason. So the first presentation in this series was talking about the role of a genetic counselor. And so while there's no legal requirement to consult with a genetic counselor, this is another reason if you're going to get any sort of DNA test done, even an ancestry test, it would be wise to consult with a genetic counselor, or they are professional genetic genealogists. So they're actually certified. And some of them, their training is in traditional genealogical techniques, where they look at census records and things like that, and land deeds and whatnot. But now they're adding DNA testing to that. So they see it as a supplement to, not a replacement for traditional genealogy. But if you can find someone that's knowledgeable in genetics, who's a genealogist, that's another person to consult who would be able to, to inform you of these issues that that might arise. So, surprises that you're not expecting, and unwelcome surprises in many cases. So, with that, I'd like to see if anyone has any questions. Well, I see one that is here. It says, is it important to get MTHFR gene mutation blood lab? What does it reveal? So the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics recommends not testing for that gene because they believe there's no actual information from that. So that's what their guidance is. Individual geneticists might have differing opinions, but the overarching guidance is that it's not really informative. It's not worth being tested for. The best answer I can give, I guess, if you have a mutation in that gene, well, you get 2 copies of it. So in a lot of cases, you can have a loss of function mutation in 1 copy of a gene, but the functioning version of the gene on the homologous chromosome takes over for it. So in a lot of cases, all you need is 1 functioning gene, and so it's not an issue. But if you have 2 loss of function mutations in both copies of a gene, in this case, you may want to talk with a physician about maybe taking a folic acid supplement. And then also, the genetic testing accurately predict cancer in an individual. Well, it depends on what you mean accurate. It can detect certain syndromes. So there's about 24 different cancer syndromes, Lynch syndrome and FAP, different colon cancer syndromes. There's breast and ovarian cancer syndromes, which include BRCA1 and BRCA2. Again, what's important is, let's say BRCA1 is a gene, it's a caretaker gene that's important with ensuring the fidelity of replication of DNA prior to cell division. And if it's not functioning correctly, then you could induce mutations in a replicating cell, and that's why that's a problem. Now, people will have a loss of function mutation in 1 copy of the BRCA1 gene, have a slightly elevated risk of breast and ovarian cancer, and then as well prostate cancer. It's something in the neighborhood of 10 to 20% increased risk. If you have a loss of function in both, then the risk goes up something like 60 to 70%. It's off the top of my head, but it's much higher risk. So again, these are risk related. It doesn't necessarily there's no genetic determinism in most cases. So they're fairly accurate. Again, that's why you would consult with a genetic counselor prior to having a genetic test for cancer syndrome, so they can explain to you the risks involved with what the test will reveal and what a percentage increase in risk would entail. And in most every case, the actionable item would be that you take better care of your health. So you avoid alcohol and tobacco, you exercise, you eat well. So it's kind of the same advice that everybody should have. And so, so there's that. So yeah, they're accurate in terms of giving you results, but then the results are still, in most cases, left to interpretation. Is there a genetic testing company you recommend? No, I'm staying away from that. A lot of companies have sprung up. I think I need to be neutral in terms of genetic testing companies. But what I will say, and this is across the board, the prevailing wisdom is that if you do take a test through a direct-to-consumer testing company, that you take those results with a grain of salt. Said there's a lot of false positives and false negatives, and if you have a medical issue or concern, what you need to do is talk with a professional and go to an actual licensed medical genetic testing laboratory. So these other direct-to-consumer testing laboratories, they might have a CLIA license, but they're not really set up to do medical genetic testing. And so you always want at least another test, a confirmatory test. In fact, you might want to have two using different methods, especially if you're considering something radical. It's like a double mastectomy, right? You'd want to have testing done by separate medical laboratories using different methodologies to confirm that, because that's an irreversible procedure, right? And so you want to do that. Are there genetic testing companies that are better in terms of privacy? Again, you have to look at the fine print and read their fine print, and even you might have to call them or contact them and ask them, pointed questions. What are you concerned about in terms of privacy? Let's see. So is it worthwhile to get genetic testing? That's that's up to the person, right? So if you're prepared for unanticipated results, you're prepared to know that the results may be unreliable, then then it's your decision. If you want to get testing done. I've had testing done specifically for pharmacogenomics, so how my body responds to different drugs. That's actionable information that's important to have. It's nothing to do with cancer predisposition or ancestry or anything else. So I focused my testing on what was important to me. But again, these are individual choices. Let's see. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I'm kind of answering these live.
That's great, Dr.
Wow.
Hanley. It looks like you've answered all the questions that we have in the chat, and really appreciate this second part.
Okay. Well, this is anything else. There's a couple things I want to bring to your attention. And let's see if My slide deck is working. So one thing I want to make, we touched on at the beginning of this session, is that I'm the program director of the Master of Science in Human Genetics and Genomics. So if you're interested, you can get this Master of Science degree 100% online, so you can get this degree from anywhere. It's asynchronous for the most part. So you can do it on your own time. There's no set schedule. You can get it done in 3 terms, so 12 months. So within 1 year, you can get a master's degree in Human Genetics and Genomics. You can also enter in the fall, spring, or summer terms. And we are unique in the way that we cover not only the traditional genetics, but also the latest discoveries and technologies and topics. So I've scoured other universities' programs, and I've made sure that we incorporate. We're not teaching the same thing, that a lot of universities do. It's the same thing, same courses that have been taught for 10 or 20 years over and over again, and they're producing academics solely. That we're looking to bring in fresh and new information, and information that also is applicable to working professionals. And so we have the URL there. I think one of the moderators will post it in the chat. And also, we just launched a podcast. And so we have the anagram DNA and Dan. DNA Dan podcast, just launched it. It's on Spotify. Plan to put up episodes about once a week, and maybe more frequently as we get more in the pipeline. But I want people to be aware of that. And so there's another URL where you can find. It's the central place where you can find where all the podcasts will be uploaded. So with that, again, if there's no more comments or questions, let's see if I'll check. Oh, pharmacogenomics. Yeah, this is important. Pharmacogenomics, very quickly, is just the way that our appearances differ because of our genetics. It's the same thing about our metabolisms and how we metabolize and respond to medications. So medications are metabolized by certain enzymes and that are encoded by genes, and we all differ in those. So some of us have a loss of function in some of those genes, so we produce non-functional enzymes. So some people will metabolize a drug very slowly because they're not producing enough enzyme. Some people are hyperactive. They actually have several copies of a gene that produce a whole lot of these metabolizing proteins. So they're very fast metabolizers. And so that's something that's important to know when you're taking a medication, and it differs by different medications, which enzyme is metabolizing it. So in certain instances, if you're a slow metabolizer, you take a medication, you could get a very high blood level, which could reach toxicity levels and have adverse side effects. Or if you're a very fast metabolizer, you may not get any therapeutic effect at all. And the same holds for the target of the drug. And so if the target is some sort of receptor on a cell, and you have a mutation in that receptor, then the drug is not going to have any effect on it. And so in the short term, it's important to know for your health, your pharmacogenomic status. And there's a core set of genes. There's 34 core genes that are involved with drug metabolism, and you could expand that out if you want to look for other ones. But there's 34 that are recognized as being the core genes that are responsible for drug metabolism and effects. So that's why I got the test done, so that I know, and I can inform. I actually teach my physician through the report, like, okay, if I'm going to take this medication because of my genetics, maybe I should be taking half the recommended dose.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hanley. I'm going to need to share my screen just to finish us off here.
All righty.
And let's see here. Okay. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So if you enjoyed the last two presentations with Dr. Hanley, the third part of the three-part series is actually in November, on November 5th. Dr. Hanley will be joining us again on another topic on genetics, astounding successes using gene therapies. We, of course, will send out reminders in November at the end of October about this webinar, but if you're interested in signing up right now, you can do so, so feel free to do that. I really just want to thank one of our gold sponsors, SCU, Southern California University of Health Sciences, and you all saw the program that Dr. Hanley was just talking about that they have developed. Really, it is one of the just premier clinical genetics programs in the country for clinicians. So I really encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to visit. But they also have just all sorts of really incredible certificates and programs in Southern California and online. So please visit www.scuh.edu to find out more about that. Lastly, again, if you are interested in joining our interprofessional fellowship and you mentioned the SCU ad, you can get $1,500 off tuition. Please take a look at our program, aihm.org/fellowship. And looking forward next Friday, July 30th, for one of our fellowship faculty, Dr. Ryan McNally, who is a naturopathic doctor and a physician's assistant. He'll be joining us on the topic of longevity and health span medicine, a new paradigm in medicine. I want to invite you all. We have actually decided to go hybrid this year. So our kind of infamous AIHM People Planet Purpose Conference that we have every year in the fall, we will be holding both virtually and in person at Paradise Point Resort in San Diego, California, October 29th, 30th, and 31st. We have opened registration for members only until Sunday night. There are limited in-person seats. So if you're interested in attending in person, we highly encourage you to sign up quicker because those slots will definitely sell out. And then of course, the virtual attendance, you'll be able to register until the conference. Lastly, remember, there's lots of ways to connect with us. With the Academy, you can go to our YouTube channel, our Twitter, our Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. We're all of those places. We're at AIHM Global. And we really encourage you to join the AIHM community. If you enjoy the educational opportunities and would like more networking, become an AIHM member or join a local chapter. So again, thank you, Dr. Hanley. Thank you, SCU, and we will see you all next week.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.